Welcome to Global Book Network. I'm Zach Feldman. Thanks so much for tuning in here on YouTube and on globalbooknetwork.tv. We're joined by an author. She has a new book out called Legends of War. It is C.A. Portnellus. C.A., thanks so much for joining me here on Global Book Network. How you doing?
Thank you. It's good to be here. I'm very excited to talk with you and let people know about the book.
Yeah, hell yeah. I mean, and it's a really, really awesome book. Tell me all about Legends of War. I mean, obviously, this is the second book in the series, but, what is this series all about?
The series is called Sparrow Wars in the Garden of Bliss, and it's in reference to how the innocents are sometimes taken over by those that are more popular or powerful. Um, and the sparrows living their happy little lives, and then the ravens of war come in and destroy everything that they've created and take everything. And so the series is actually has that war and peace thread throughout the entire series, but it's mainly about a family who it's a family saga, Le Bars, and they are formerly of France, and they have a legacy that they try to uphold, and they have a family curse that follows them everywhere they go, and so some of that curse shows up in the book, and the main character in Legends of War is Barton Barr, and he is a 20-year-old young man, newly graduated from college and ready to begin his life. And he makes a mistake, a very
Mm.
grave mistake, and he ends up in the war. and and much to the disappointment of his family, and they kind of believe that all their hopes and dreams, because they were hoping he would be the last generation that is under the thrall of the family curse. So
Wow.
uh, that's and every book. This book is actually pivotal in that it begins the domino effect of that curse, and so
This is kind of his origin story in a sense, then.
yeah, a little
Yeah.
bit. Prelude to War was the very first book, and it just introduces us to the family. It gives their back history that takes them all the way back to France, and then and the child that we meet in 1928 in the first book is Barton, and he's only 5.5. And now in the second book, he's 20 and headed for war.
Wow. That's crazy. I mean,
So,
and it's such an invigorating series, of just of so much passion that happens. You're writing specifically, you love to kind of infuse these realistic characters, obviously still fiction, but these realistic characters, in your stories. Are they based off of anybody specific in your life?
no, not really. Although I did give a couple of characters, for example, Richard Barr, Barton's father, has my father's birth date. And that's because they're both Aries, and that was the perfect character to bounce off of his son, because he's a little autocratic, but he's also, he's the family. He is also under the curse, and so is his father. So the family still believes after, it's 300 years, they still believe that this curse is active, and they're hoping that if the consecutive generations of third sons all live exemplary lives, then maybe they'll be lucky and the curse will break. Well,
Hmm.
the very last of these generations is now involved in the war. So that you can imagine, the sadness and also the anger that follows that. And
Are you a big believer in zodiac signs? Are
a
you
little bit, yeah, a little bit. I've played with it. I've played with it,
you know,
and there's also another very odd thing. As I was writing, I gave Barton. It just happened. I gave him a specific birth date, and it just happened to fall on Adolf Hitler's birthday,
oh, what's funny
which
about
is
that?
very
Is that
weird.
is that 420?
Yes.
And that is my birthday as well.
gosh, how fortuitous
Unfortunately, yes.
to
But I
share
always say there's a
somebody with
happy.
such a desperate.
I always say that it's a happy day though because I was born, so that works out, you
There
know.
you go. That works. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You've written so much out there in the world. What makes this so different from your other books? Obviously, this is about war. That's the number one thing. But
Mhm.
but you've written war books before, like The Road Home before. Tell
Yeah.
me a little about writing in about military.
Well, here's the thing is that Legends of War is the second in the series. The first is called Prelude to War, and that sets everything up. It takes us from through the Depression era up to the beginning of World War II. In Legends of War, the book that is currently out is the 10th anniversary edition of Legend of the original. I originally published it back in 2014. So this is the 10th anniversary edition. It also comes at an auspicious time because this year, it's the 81st year of D-Day.
Yeah,
And a lot of the book great portion of Legends of War revolves around D-Day.
yeah,
Um, but as far as the series is concerned, it follows this family, the Labar families, and like I said, Legends of War is pivotal to the rest of the series because everything that happens in Legends of War then has a cause and effect that dominoes throughout the rest of the books. Right now, I have more books in the series. There's actually 13. Nine of them have been written, and technically five of them have been published.
that's awesome. Well,
So,
hopefully we'll get the other ones published soon, and I'd love to
yeah,
continue that journey with you. About about the war and about all the different things that happened through it too. Do you remember? Do you have any recollection of when when war was happening? Were you ever in like anywhere near anything with war or like
yes, actually,
was it a big deal in your life at all?
yeah, and I'll preface this with my father was a historian. When he was in college, he was a fine arts major and a history major. And then he was part of the ROTC Wyoming Guard, and they sent him to Korea.
Wow.
When he came back, he didn't have a whole lot to say about it, but he had a lot of photography. And that was sort of, I guess, one of his jobs was that he was the company photographer, the
Wow.
historian. So when he came back, he changed his degree and to something that was going to be more useful and possibly more profitable than being a historian or an art major. But my life, my entire childhood and my life was always revolved around history and the legacies of families, and the outcomes of these historic things. So obviously he grew up during the Depression era and World War II, and then was the next son to go, and so that was kind of the premise a little bit of this series, is that we don't know until really until Legends of War comes out that Richard Barr was in World War One,
Wow.
and he guides his son because his son, is sort of the chosen kid, the third kid, and he believes that he needs to guide him because the kid's a little bit of a loose cannon. He's a wild child, and he tells him what his experience was in World War One.
Well, I thank you
And
for your dad first off
yeah,
that he, he's such an American hero for
yeah.
doing that and for our country. It's just incredible and really thank him for his service too for us. But I want to, I think it's so cool that you not only you wrote the first book, but then we're kind of going backwards in a sense for this prequel. And
Mhm.
learning more about his life in that sense. Was that always your intention, or did that just spark out of creativity?
It actually was creativity. And truthfully, I originally started one book and I said, you know what? In order to tell the stories as the characters started to evolve and the people and storylines started to work, I would have had to go backwards and all the flashbacks and other people's stories. And I said, let's find a midway point and take it from that point. on. So Prelude to War, even though there's this huge, rich history of this French family coming from France, going to Canada, being granted land in Canada, and then getting tossed out in the 1700s, um, they end up down in Louisiana and they become plantation owners. Well, I give all of that history, kind of like back history, because that is their legacy, that is their history. And so we get that throughout the books, those little bits and pieces. So that was my way of writing somebody else's legacy. And I've always been fascinated by, family stories. Uh, my parents were basically first and second generation Americans. So I fall in that category too. Now I'm second, third generation American. Um, and they came from very diverse backgrounds. But that legacy, of coming to America and being, um, you know, casting your casting your nets out and trying to create a fortune, trying to create a new life,
Mhm.
um, during that. That was my take on this series. And again, it's overshadowed by all the problematic things that happen in society and the world. You know,
Yeah, there's a lot of
we
lessons in this book too, that, it shows when you read it and when you go through it too. I mean, there's just the triumph of just getting into the aspects of the war. I mean, that's a huge
right,
part of it too.
right,
And then
and
and you also show too, his battle and struggle with all of his issues.
exactly. And it is a book of self discovery for Barton. It's also sort of a sobering effect on his family back home in America, because they didn't come out of the Depression so great either. Everyone, once upon a time they were affluent plantation owners, and then with the Civil War and everything, I mean, everything starts to take its toll, and you just never quite, they just never quite recoup all their losses. And so that's their history. And one of the things about these people is that in general the Labars are very resilient. When they were in France, they had a family motto that was, "We fly with the winds,"
Mm.
meaning that they're going to go wherever they can to do whatever they, is the best, the easiest, everything. When they come to America, 100 years later, their motto becomes "Nous sommes contre les vents." We fly against the winds.
Wow.
And so they have decided that they will find their fortunes, they will do what they have to. And of course, amid this family legacy that they have of the curse, uh, they really do, create their own way to go. And so that's how these people have been brought up. And as a lot of French families have this very deep pride, and their roots are important. And for this family, especially so, even though they're in America and Americans, they always go back to France for their wives, for their spouses, because they want to keep the lineage pure, that pure French line. And
Well, also they love their
so
spouses too. I mean, let's be real
yeah,
here.
yeah, yeah. Well, and that's the thing. That's the thing too, is that they even though they get a mail ordered French bride from Paris or Provence or somewhere, there's a love story, and every one of these books has a love story, at least one, where it's either something new, or it's a rekindled love, or it could be a coming of age love. And when I say coming of age, it's just that these are young people growing up and they're learning, they're falling in love and they're learning. It's not intended for children or for young adults. So
Understand.
it's a little bit racy at times.
Well, listen, we like
And that's,
racing. It's totally fine.
yeah, yeah. And the thing of it is, I am not politically correct when I write. I write of the period. I write of the way that people spoke, the mindset of the society at the time. And while it may not be what we do today or how we believe, that's what believed back then. And
No, but
so
you know what?
there's,
That's what's good about your writing is that you stick with the period and you really capture the emotion of what happened in that time. and that's what really sets this book apart from others. And it's a lot of fun to read. I wanted to ask you too. When you started writing, was this always your passion to kind of go to the historical route, or what was your creativity passion when it came to writing?
When I was 6 years old, a cousin asked, actually, an elder cousin asked me, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I said, "I want to write books and illustrate them." I was always an artist. I always was fascinated by books. My earliest pictures of me as a toddler, I'm holding, I almost always have a book in my hand, you know. So, and my father was a bookworm. They just kindled that love of books. And uh, we moved a lot because my father worked for the government, and so we moved a lot. And everywhere we went, there was some new place to be, some new history to learn. And I just got wrapped up in the history of everything. We'd be driving down the road, and all of a sudden, hysterical marker. That was our, because Dad and I would get hysterical about, what was going on, and ooh, what happened here, yeah. So, I've always been attracted to
Always been that
historical
history
writing.
buff in a sense, then.
A little bit, yeah. And actually, when I first started writing, I was mostly a poet,
But
and
also an
and that
artist too, because
yes,
looking at your website too. I mean, you have so much artwork that you've produced, and it's just they're always so beautiful too.
yeah. Thank you. And yeah, obviously you can't always make a big, huge living off of being an artist, nor can you do it off of writing. If you're lucky, you can, but I really didn't start doing published writing until 2009.
Listen, add
I
filmmaker
had,
into that whole list of things too. It's hard to make money off that as well. And I'm
yeah,
the
yeah,
filmmaker.
exactly. And the thing for me was, I got a job. In a way, I kind of got the perfect job. It was the closest to me being able to be an artist, and that was being a draftsman. And I spent 22 years in the telecom industry, in drafting and engineering in the telecom industry. And when I gave it up in right shortly after 2000, I said, I'm going to go back to some of my roots. I'm going to work on my art again. I've always done art, dig in, see if I can find a niche. And that led me into the writing. And it bit me.
Yeah.
It sank in, and the stories just came rolling out. I've created this entire series and all these characters that have very rich lives, and they feel, a lot of people when they read my stuff, they say, I knew somebody like that, or they feel like they're right there, they're immersed in that time and in that
Mhm.
scene. And I kind of write with, like, a movie's rolling in my head, and
Yeah.
that's how I write. So it's descriptive, it's immersive. I don't write about war all the time, as far as like global war. Um, the first couple books were about the war, but then a little bit later, it's kind of the private wars that we have, the things that happen in relationships, the things that we privately fight.
Hmm.
Maybe somebody has a habit that they just can't break. And obviously, if you read the series, you'll find some of those people that are that way, that they just, if they're fighting, they have their private wars.
Yeah.
And those private wars sometimes end up escalating. A tiff becomes deep argument, becomes a feud, becomes a war. Pretty soon it escalates into something horrendous, divorce, loss of relationships, world war,
Yeah.
So, and it's amazing how, when you study human nature, it's amazing how easily even the most peaceful of persons can fall into
Yeah.
that part of all of a sudden taking something, you know, one of my characters, I have her saying that, don't make a mud puddle into a typhoon or a flood, kind of a thing, where you just take that tiniest little nitpicking stupid thing and you turn it into something humongous,
Yeah.
and so those are some of the themes that run throughout my series, and it's like everyday life.
It
I'm
is, and
honest about
it is. and you capture it so beautifully. It really is a joy to read. Legends of War is out now on Amazon. But with CA, what is next for you?
Actually, I'm still working on the series. Like I said, I have a whole bunch written. It's a matter of getting them published now. And I've done some little side stories. I've always loved science fiction. I mean, what more, would a historian want is to go into the future, you know? So I write science fiction, I
Yeah.
write a little fantasy, and I write young adult type stories, like the teen angst type stories, and their own adventures, whether it's a fantasy or not, of being able to adjust the world to their wants and their needs, and also to learn the lessons that come out of that. There's a lot to be said for psychology, which I studied some, and the true human nature of everything, how it actually guides and leads us through all these stories. And people will say, yeah, I remember that, and I remember when I felt that way. But I'm continuing to try to find a publisher for the rest of my series, and launch
Nice.
some more. The next two books that will be coming out are The Summer of Love, 1967.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah. And so we get into a little bit, I take each book falls in decade or so, where it's still the LeBar family characters, and maybe it's the next generation of characters, their friends, their families, and how they, continue
Yeah.
continue in that
That
legacy.
realm and that realm
Hmm.
and legacy. Well, I'm really excited for people to check that out. Again, you can check out Legends of War. It's on Amazon right now. But CA Portnellus, where can people find you online?
Yes, I have a couple websites, and it's caportnellis-author.com, or author-caportnellis.com. I made
You
it
bought
simple. I
too
mean,
many? You bought both of them?
yeah, yeah. No, and I have stuff all over the place, to be
Yeah.
honest, but I'm also on Facebook and Instagram, TikTok.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Very
And
cool.
I recently was at the LA Times Book Festival,
Oh, awesome.
which was great at USC. We had a very rainy weekend, but it ended up being lots and lots of fun. And it was sort of my first foray into, my gosh, I'm signing books for people. I'm giving book interviews, and I'm actually talking about my books. Somebody's going to listen to me talk about my books. And it's like, you know,
Well,
I
I'm
I
sure. I'm
start.
sure this was nothing for you then.
No, it is always something. It is always something. And the thing too is, when you're a writer, because I've been doing this for a long time. I began the series in 2009. I first published. I said, I think this is good enough to publish. I mean, I'm an avid reader, so if I really like it, then I know it's something worthy that other people will like. And I kind of I want to write books that I want to read, you know, the kind of things that I like to read.
Yeah.
And like the very first book, I sort of wrote for my stepbrother, because we were avid readers, and quite often we would share and trade off books with each other, you know. And so I kind of wrote that for him, even though it's dedicated in another way.
Yeah.
Um, but at the same token, I kept this book very close and dear to my heart. I didn't want to say too much about what the series was about. My husband and maybe one friend actually knew anything, or any plots or characters or anything, for a very long time. I just
Yeah.
kept it close to my heart until I started to publish. And then, you know, then you it's like opening the doors and letting the world come in and see you for what you are, You're no longer a closet writer once you publish, you know.
Yeah. That makes sense. It's true.
And so,
It's really true.
yeah.
And
And
you've succeeded at it with this series especially. And I'm excited to see what happens next with your career in writing too. Definitely come back when the next books are published. Love to talk to you more about them.
yeah,
But for
thank you,
now,
Zach.
C.A. Portnellis, thank you for joining me here on Global Book Network, and best of luck with the series and best of luck with everything.
You're welcome. And thank you. It's been good to talk to you too.
Anytime. You can check out more interviews here on YouTube at Global Book Network, or you can check it out on our website. I'm Zach Feldman. Thanks for joining us here on YouTube and on globalbooknetwork.tv.